Welcome to another episode of Wicked Hot, everybody. This is John.
And Kevin.
And this week we did not post our usual Instagram post for you to guess on this week's episode. So instead, I'm just going to let you know what it is. This week, guys, in honor of the beginning of October and, of course, the spookiest month in all the year, we will be going over the origins of horror in cinema.
Mainly, we're going to be hitting the subgenres.
Yes, we'll be covering subgenres and... of course, for anyone that is not familiar with the format, this week we will be going over 3 different subgenres as well as a little bit of a movie analysis at the end, and we'll save that for later. But yeah, guys, strap in, get your popcorn, and get ready to listen to another week of Movie Mayhem with Wicked Hot.
Wicked smart, wicked cool, wicked fucking stupid, whatever the fuck. Something wicked.
I'm baking like a toasted Caesar. It's so hot here.
My boy's wicked smart.
Cause the boy is hotter than hot. He's hot.
Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?
I'm sure this can be the case for any film genre, but for the most part, the creation of the horror genre didn't lag far behind the invention of cinema. So the genre of horror itself spurs from Gothic stories written by late 19th century writers, such as Edgar Allan Poe and Bram Stoker. The first horror movie that came to the screen, however, was The House of the Devil in 1896. It's also known as The Haunted Castle, which was what it was called in its U.S. release. And
You have to say the French version of it, because I know it's a French movie.
That's right. House of the Devil is a French movie, 1896, which is crazy. You would think that the horror movie wouldn't be that far away.
Yeah, it's funny that as soon as movies start, people are already trying to make you fucking squirm.
What do you think the first genre would have been for a movie? I know it wasn't like train moving. That's not a genre.
Yeah, I'm just saying. I'm thinking like
landscape.
landscape. Like that's the genre from the 1890s.
So I guess documentary, right? Would that
Yeah,
count
I
as
guess it would be a documentary. Yeah.
Documentary followed by horror, because clearly 1896. I mean, film has just been invented.
It's like, oh, here's this train moving, and everyone's like, oh my god, and then the next movie's like a fucking
here's this train of corpses.
Yeah, it's like, oh my god, that escalated quickly.
Well, now that we got this bullshit out of the way, let's get into some real fucked up shit. But yeah, not to steal your thunder, because I'm sure in your upcoming subgenre, you're probably going to cover this exact same movie.
I will,
but I won't say why. Actually, fuck it, I'm going to spoil it anyway. I can't wait. So the movie can actually be also considered the first vampire movie, because it has a man turning into a bat, like a Batman or a man-bat, if you will. A little nod to last week's episode for everyone who's listening. So that particular movie was directed by Georges Méliès. And for people who don't know who Georges Méliès is, I'm sure you're not too keen on early 1900s film directors.
Yeah.
But he directed the movie A Trip to the Moon in 1902. And it's very famous. It has the moon with the face, black and white, and a rocket crashes right into its eye.
Yeah, it's like the movie that Hugo is like. Isn't it Hugo?
Yes, yeah. Ben Kingsley plays Georges.
Yes.
Méliès.
Yes. So it's a very, very famous director.
Yes. Yeah, kind of like one of the first directors to really, because he was also known as kind of an illusionist.
Yeah. I guess he's considered maybe one of the very first directors, like somebody that did that for a living.
Oh yeah, 100%, and a visionary as well.
Right.
I mean, we discussed earlier how most films coming, and we've discussed this in other episodes, the first films were essentially just landscape or basically testing the actual camera.
Yeah, or like trying to capture a horse running or something like that.
Yeah, where Georges Méliès is basically like, fuck it, we're going to go to the moon and we're going to have space things and vampires and other creatures. So bringing creativity and art into film rather than just for documenting purposes.
Right.
So just from looking at still images, I'm not sure if even back then the House of the Devil was considered scary, because it looks ridiculous, honestly.
Yeah.
The traits that give it the title as first horror movie is mostly the subject matter of the occult and other supernatural beings. Keep in mind, though, that The House of the Devil was only about 3 minutes long. So the first full-length picture, and by that I mean 15 minutes, came in 1910 and was produced by none other than film mogul Thomas Edison.
Oh my God. AKA John Tafford.
Yes. I think we need to feature Thomas Edison more on the show, and he is 100% a movie mogul.
Yeah, he's like the godfather, and a lot of people don't know this, but if you go back to our cinema history, Thomas Edison is involved in every fucking aspect of the beginning of filmmaking. Yeah. Like, if you thought he was like the electric inventor, like, he's way more involved in the film industry.
It's honestly, I feel like just pinning him as, the guy who invented or brought electricity and the, right, it wasn't it the
light bulb. The light bulb.
Yeah, the light bulb.
This
motherfucker was like involved with every invention. I'm convinced he may have invented everything.
Yeah.
Surprising to me, though, even when movies were first starting to come out, they still did not have original ideas and were adapted from fucking books, which is insane to me.
Yeah.
In this case, in 1910, was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and not the famous Universal one with Boris Karloff. It came in 1910. The Frankenstein monster looked honestly like an old lady. It was very weird looking. If you look at still images, it's just strange. So at this point, this is when horror movies were continuously adapted from horror literature, such as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and The Werewolves, which was a short story the movie was in 1913. The short story was from 1898. To which, interestingly enough, the first werewolf movie is titled The Werewolf. Super creative.
Very original.
This brings us to, and I'm going to push forward a little bit, and by a little bit I mean a lot, to the 1930s, also known as the Golden Age of Horror, when Universal released what are known now as the classic horror creatures, such as Dracula, The Mummy, The Invisible Man, and talking remakes such as Frankenstein. And this is the Boris Karloff one for everyone that's paying attention. Leading into my first subgenre, which is werewolf movies, if you hadn't guessed. Although the first werewolf movie was The Werewolf, the film that brought the character/creature into true horror canon is The Wolfman in 1941. What's crazy about this is that coincidentally, Germany is clearly at war with the world at this point. 1941. Hitler himself strongly identified with the iconography of wolves. For instance, Adolf, the actual name, means noble wolf in German, and even his lair in East Prussia, which is, for people that don't know what that is, if you've seen the movie Valkyrie, that's the site of the Valkyrie assassination attempt where they put the bomb in his headquarters. It's called the Wolfschanz, which is known as the Wolf's Lair.
Man, he really took the Adolf thing and ran with it.
He really did.
It's like Adolf Wolves? Okay, well, I'm going to base my whole life off wolves. Fuck it, we're getting wolves everything.
Lone wolf, wolf core.
Yeah, wolf pack, everything.
Alpha wolf. But yeah, it's interesting because if you think about a lot of Jews at the time, there was a lot of visionary filmmaking in Germany pre-Nazi occupation. So obviously once the Nazis took over, a lot of those Jewish filmmakers moved over to Hollywood. And now it makes sense how you could kind of see the parallels of whoever is involved with filmmaking is thinking, hey, we should have a creature, a villain that is based on this thing that we fled, which is, it's crazy that's Nazis are basically involved with everything. And we get the Wolfman from that.
Damn, so Hitler was the inspiration for werewolves.
Basically, yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I'm sure like lichens and I guess the study of werewolves is like lycanthropy was around.
Of course it is.
But for it to be an actual like creature in like movies, I think they saw the similarities in it and they're like, hey, let's be a little tongue in cheek and make a Hitler a werewolf and that's our movie villain.
Nice. Hitler's always an easy target.
He really is. The Wolfman was the first time a werewolf monster film featured thematic elements that are synonymous with the subgenre today. So if you think about it, Silver Bullets, aversion to silver, full moon, gypsy legends, ties to witchcraft, and eating human flesh. In the 50s, the movie I Was a Teenage Werewolf came out and gave nods and similarities more to the growing pains of being a teenager and the changes your body goes through. And it's interesting because it also showed what happens to someone who is a rebellious teen who disobeys the law. It's a leitmotif of how a werewolf is a troubled youth who is eventually put down by the cops. And this seems to be a recurring theme that happens during the 50s with, teenagers lashing out. And I mean, if you think about A Rebel Without a Cause with James Dean, came out in the 50s. It's kind of got the same premise. He's kind of a bad boy kid, and he gets other kids into trouble until one of them gets killed in the end. Spoilers for a 1950s movie. But so the werewolf movies of being a teenager kind of paralleled Rebel Without a Cause in a sense. By the 60s and 70s, though, werewolf movies kind of went by the wayside, which is insane considering how huge the Wolfman was in 1941. And this may be one of the first times in history where Hollywood hasn't beaten a franchise or an idea half to death. There's like, okay, we have two movies. 1941's Wolfman. We'll come out with the teenage one. Okay, people aren't really getting this. I guess we'll just stop.
That's unheard of. Because nowadays it's like, you don't get it. Here's more. Take more of it. You don't like Fast and Furious? Here's 9 of them.
Yeah. Well, I guess they still make money, right? So
yeah, that's true.
Like, what's a franchise that
doesn't make money or is
and
shit?
That was terrible?
Pirates of the Caribbean.
But they still made like 5.
They make money, but they're fucking trash. I think they could make a good werewolf movie nowadays.
I agree. Well, with a caveat, because they remade Wolfman with Benicio del Toro. Do you remember this?
I do, yes.
Yes. So I think they can. I just don't think they have the capacity to do it right now.
They don't have
as
the
far
capacity.
As creatively.
Yeah, they
can do it. They can produce it. It's just whether or not it'll be good.
They don't have the ability to come up with something new. So they're like, out of the 3 werewolf movies there are, they're like, pick one and we'll remake it. And that didn't work for Hollywood in the 50s. So why would you think it worked now? Come up with your new shit. Like, maybe you can revive the werewolf subgenre.
Which is crazy because if you think about it, we didn't see werewolves featured prominently until 1981. Big year for werewolves.
Is that Teen Wolf?
No. We had The Howling and American Werewolf in London. Both of those came out at the same time.
Okay.
I've never seen The Howling, but I'm a big fan of An American Werewolf in London. Minus the ending, I'm not a big fan of it. But it's funny that you say it. It brought something new to the table. Something that hadn't been seen before. It wasn't just a generic monster movie. It had substance and it had humor. Like American Werewolf in London had humor. And honestly, The Howling kind of had a bit of humor as well in it. Also, in American Werewolf in London, we actually get to see an amazing transformation scene with effects provided by the legendary Rick Baker. And if you don't know who Rick Baker is, he's done effects for Star Wars, The Howling, Men in Black, Planet of the Apes, Batman Forever, and even the Thriller music video. Do you know what scene I'm talking about? The transformation?
Yes. It's been a very long time since I've seen that movie, but yeah, I do remember it pretty well.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, the way his whole face changes and forms, it's crazy that nowadays it would just be all CGI and no prosthetics or anything like that.
Yeah.
But it's funny that you mentioned Teen Wolf because the popularity of the werewolf genre during the 80s transferred to a pseudo remake of I Was a Teenage Werewolf and Teen Wolf with Michael J. Fox. Obviously, this is a more comedic take and not horror at all.
Isn't that the movie where somebody whips their dick out at the end?
I have no idea. I don't remember that.
Somebody had just...
A werewolf dick?
No, an extra in the crowd at the end at the basketball game. At the end, one of the crowd members stands up, and he's like off in the very far distance, whips his
So you
fucking
can't-
dick out. Oh, you can see it.
It's large?
It's what?
I asked if it was large.
In terms of penis size?
Yeah, if you could, because you were like, no, you can definitely see it.
Well, I mean, it's easy to not notice, and then once you notice it, you're like, oh, there's a dick in that scene.
If I'm going to be honest, I'm going to go in incognito mode right quick because I just Teen Wolf dick. I don't know what's going to come up.
Probably some bestiality stuff.
So after a lot of research, guys, we have determined that the penis was not out and it was all a lie.
Yeah, it was a hoax. It was a dick hoax.
Yeah. But with Teen Wolf, obviously this is more of a comedic tale and not horror at all. The usage of horror still helped translate the motif of turning into a werewolf to that of growing up as a teenage boy. And I mean, at this point in the modern time, werewolf genre on its own continues to fade into obscurity again, unless it accompanies other lore. Specifically, I'm thinking of Underworld, it was around for a while. True Blood, it was around for a while. Twilight, because Twilight. And now, I mean, let's be honest, all three of those basically faded into obscurity at this point. I'm sure we'll see a remake or resurgence at some point or another, but unless there's something fresh, like how American Werewolf in London and Howling brought into the werewolf genre, just coming up with a generic monster movie about a werewolf, I don't think is going to cut it nowadays.
No, I don't think so. It's going to have to be like Underworld kind of does it. But they're obviously the movies aren't very good, and Twilight kind of ruined the whole thing by making it just a fucking joke.
Yeah, totally.
So
Team Jacob, you mean? Team Jacob. I know you knew who it was.
Yeah, I do know those. My first one is going to be supernatural horror movies, and I'm going to go specifically with like ghost, demon stuff. So supernatural.
Are we going to get into
I'm getting a
some
sub
general
genre.
stuff?
Getting a sub genre in there. So
Demon
supernatural
general talk.
supernatural films. I'm gonna call them supernatural films, even though I'm specifically or mainly talking about ghost and demon stuff.
I think that covers most supernatural things, though.
It does, but there's also like angels are also supernatural. Like
What are horror movies with angels in them?
not specifically horror movies, but that genre of supernatural, like supernatural.
Okay,
The
fair
term implies like anything otherworldly,
enough.
good or
Okay.
bad. Supernatural films are like ghosts, demons, devil. A lot of times they have like a connotation of religion, but not all the time.
Right.
The common themes in this genre are like afterlife, demonic possession, and you see a lot of that in like the middle, like the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
Which is kind of weird because like it comes out of nowhere and you already have like 20 or 30 years of horror movies before ghosts are actually represented as something that can hurt you or is scary. So up until this point, go ahead.
That's crazy because I know. I'm sorry to cut you off. I know that a big thing, and that's kind of what made these type of horror movies popular. And when we were talking about just the origin of horror movies in general, a big attraction back in the 1890s were pictures where it looked like there was a silhouette or a faded figure behind you.
Yeah.
In other words, it was kind of the beginning of the photo booth of, oh, look, there's a silly, scary monster behind me, or a ghost, or
Yeah.
the orbs, the fucking orbs that if you go to like any, notoriously haunted place, it's like, oh, look at all these pictures of all these people taking pictures, and there's all the fucking orbs in the background. So that's crazy to me that it took that long for them to be like, actually, you know what? Maybe they want to see this in a movie.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that because I'm actually going to the most haunted place in America, the Jerome Haunted Hotel. For Halloween.
On Halloween?
Yes.
And you're going to stay there and sleep in it?
Yes.
Fuck that.
I'm nervous.
Yeah, I don't fuck with haunted hotels because those are the most haunted fucking places ever.
Haunted hotels and haunted. Well, if the most haunted place ever is like a haunted insane asylum. It goes like insane asylum.
Even an insane
regular
asylum that's
hospital.
not haunted.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
not fucking around with that
It's,
shit.
it's so creepy. Anything abandoned is creepy. So with Ghosts, most of their on-screen time was not scary at all. It was meant to be like a guiding force to somebody, trying to figure something out. Like think of A Christmas Carol, the 1938 movie. Like the ghosts help him kind of figure out the meaning of Christmas and all that bullshit. So ghosts were never meant to be like this scary thing, and it wasn't until, and this kind of blew my dick off about how long it took to come up with a horror movie involving ghosts. Actually, a feature-length movie was The Uninvited, which was a 1944 movie.
44? Holy
Yeah,
shit.
Yeah, very, very long. Tell me if this synopsis sounds a little familiar. So it's a music critic and his sister. They purchase a spooky house and vengeful spirits and eerie occurrences like the smell of mimosas, chilled rooms, flickering candles, opening and closing doors. That it all happens to them when they move into this house.
Paranormal Activity.
Basically, every modern horror movie is based off of this story.
Dude, don't sleep on the 40s and 50s because there were a lot of fucking movies that people just forgot about and visionary directors came, and I'm doing air quotes right now, came up with and penned it as their own, and they're like, they're fucking it, the most genius people ever. I guarantee you in fucking 70 or 80 years, maybe not because of the technology, it's going to be the same thing. They'll be like, oh my God, The Godfather is this visionary thing. And it was just, it's from 1970s.
Yeah, and it kind of sucks because the genre was very, very short-lived in its inception. So it was really big around the 20s and 30s, but it didn't start to get like ghost demons until like the 40s. And then by the 50s, the genre had completely died off. They weren't making They weren't making supernatural horror movies. They were completely replaced by like modern psychological or science fiction horror movies. So the space stuff. Everybody was obsessed with space back then.
Obviously, for good reason, 50s and 60s.
Yeah, so supernatural horror movies kind of took a back seat. So supernatural horror movies, they were kind of scattered in with the 60s, 70s, and 80s with like The Demon, Omen, The Exorcist. So you do kind of get some of those, but the resurgence of the supernatural or the paranormal horror genre didn't really come back until like the late 90s. Okay. With like The Grudge, The Ring, like that type of stuff brought back like
it
the
took
Ghost.
That long.
Yeah, it took a very long time for people to get back into paranormal horror movies.
That's crazy because I feel like that's all movies now.
Yeah, and after I would say after like 2008, especially with the digital Netflix age, like you can make a horror movie and get it on Netflix for like $50,000, and people do that. Like there are some shitty movies on Netflix, horror movies.
Oh,
like paranormal,
and then now you have Shudder too.
Yeah, exactly. So the people are pumping out these paranormal horror movies, and it sucks because I love the genre so much, and it's like it goes from the 40s where they're making like good constant movies, and it's just like 2018 they're just fucking throwing out these paranormal movies, and it's hard to sift through like what's good and what's terrible.
Right. It's like the Netflix of cinema history.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You're like, fuck, another one of these? God damn.
Yeah, and I'm always searching on Netflix, and I'm like, oh shit. And IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes can go fuck themselves because they have ruined movies for me.
Do they? How?
They ruin it because like I'll find a movie on Netflix and I'll be like, okay, this looks like it might be something. The synopsis is good. The trailer is good. Look it up on Rotten Tomatoes. It's like a 26. Like, fuck.
Yeah, that's true.
Now I can't watch this. When it used to be like, oh, what's this movie? I'm just going to watch it and find out.
I'm just going, yeah. I remember I never used to look at things. Probably why I saw so many bad movies, and maybe why. Imagine if one of the like horrible movies you've never seen before, and or like I'm sorry, one of the most horrible movies you know but you love. Imagine if you saw it on Rotten Tomatoes, you probably would never seen it. You would have never known.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think Rotten Tomatoes, and I think I can't remember who it was. It was a big name actor was saying that Rotten Tomatoes specifically like ruined filmmaking. I think it might have been Martin Scorsese.
He says a lot of things.
He does say a lot of things. He talks a lot. Talks
He
very
does.
fast.
Kevin, I'm going to bring you back again. We're going back to the 1930s, specifically 1932, when Zombonis, aka zombies, are first featured on screen in the film White Zombie.
I completely forgot that we used to say Zamboni all the time.
We used to say it all the time. It's from fucking 7 Days to Die because of that.
Oh, that's why. I
Yeah.
was like, what the 7 Days to Die. Yeah, we started saying Zambonis. And it just turned into a thing, and that's what we say now.
And that's how we call zombies. So apologies for everyone who wasn't playing 7 Days to Die with us. But yeah, White Zombie, starring Bela Lugosi, who everyone knows as Dracula. Though the portrayal of zombies in this film weren't that of flesh-eating monsters, but more like brainwashed people. Bela Lugosi, and just to set up how the movie is, plays an evil voodoo priest who lures people into his plantation and makes them his slaves, which sounds really fucked up.
Who made this movie? Was it the same guy that did Birth of a Nation?
No, it wasn't. It was not the same guy. These people are in a trance. They don't transform into anything ghoulish. Just normal brainwashed people. I guess at the time in the 30s, a zombie just meant, someone that was just going through the motions, getting through, slugging along. The best way to make a parallel to something more recent, for people that are just kind of still not understanding what I'm talking about, is how in 1999's The Mummy, starring Brendan Fraser,
Jesus.
the antagonist Imhotep makes people brainwash servants, but they don't eat people, and for the most part, they look pretty normal.
Okay.
So the next,
I'm thinking like The Happening, when people get infected by the air.
Oh yeah,
and they just just kind of start walking around.
Yeah, but I feel like in The Happening, they're like out to like kill themselves. These guys are just kind of
hanging out.
I need to have some yard work done. So be a zombie. Hoo-loo-loo-loo-loo. Just like, all right, well, I got to go rake these leaves now.
Right.
It seems very innocent, unless they were going to be all his sex slaves, which evil voodoo priest in a plantation.
Well, it's weird that you go specifically to like doing yard work, because I'm thinking like this guy's on a plantation and obviously he has owned slaves or does own slaves. So he's like this is like his dream world where like they just continue to be slaves and just like are zombified.
He's like, you know what? Fuck your Emancipation Proclamation. I have voodoo magic. So the next pseudo zombie, I'm going to say pseudo because they're not actually what the zombies we know today, in the during the 30s, pretty much followed suit, and at times beat for beat the trope of Haitian voodoo or some sort of exotic sorcery. But none of the films within the 30s mentioned people coming back from the grave and craving human flesh. It was either brainwashed human beings or necromancy, where a sorcerer could summon ghouls to do his or her bidding.
That is some fucking Skyrim level shit right there.
Oh yeah. Your fucking conjuration is on point.
Yeah,
right there.
100 conjuration right there.
But yeah, so they can raise ghouls, do their bidding, but they're still under his or her control, and they're not wild and loose like the zombies of today's horror films. Jumping into the 40s and 50s now, we have the first rendition of Nazi zombies. You heard it here, folks. Nazi zombies is not something that Call of Duty came up with. In fact, the concept was first introduced in the 1941 film King of the Zombies.
Fuck, what was that Nazi zombie movie that they did recently?
Dead Snow.
Is that it?
Yeah.
They made a sequel to it too.
Dead Snow 2.
Red versus Dead. Yes, that is it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what I thought of. And when that was coming out, I was like, oh my God, that's so original. Now I know it's
Nope.
all a fucking sham.
Yep, it's from 1941. Again, another. I find it interesting that this is the second time Nazis somehow find their way into the background of fucking horror characters.
Yeah.
They're just like werewolves, Nazis, zombies. Fuck it, they're Nazis too.
Yeah. It's like back then they're like anything bad it could be considered a Nazi. So they're like, fuck it, you flatten your tire, like that's a Nazi act. It's like
Dude,
it was like the it was like nowadays they say like thanks Obama. And now it's like thanks
Hitler.
Nazis. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like back in the 40s it was like fucking Hitler did it.
Yeah, speaking of a Nazi zombie movie, actually, I wanted to mention this. There's a new movie called Overlord. It looks super awesome, and it's produced by J.J. Abrams,
Okay.
and not executive producer. So he's on set all the time. He's actually
Okay.
producer. And back me up on that. Is that correct? Executive is like
Executive is
doing
like the suit.
high level.
Yeah.
yeah.
They're too busy doing high level shit to be on set.
Yeah. So J.J. Abrams is producing. It's a Nazi zombie movie, and it looks pretty cool. But yeah, Dead Snow and Dead Snow 2, I'm also a big fan of. They're fucking hilarious.
Okay. Damn, I'm sad that it's like basically a remake or a stolen idea.
Yeah, I know. It does suck. And it's funny because despite featuring a new type of zombie, the Nazi zombie, King of the Zombies still featured the decade-old trope of using voodoo to either brainwash or quote-unquote raise a zombie army. They even had it.
I don't like
yeah.
that.
Yeah. No, the voodoo shit is bullshit.
Yeah.
And even the sequel / remake, Revenge of the Zombies, in 1943, sort of strays away from the typical tropes and instead uses a mad scientist who wants to create a new race of zombies for Nazi Germany.
I can get down with that. The voodoo
Yeah.
thing, no. I believe in a lot of things. Voodoo is not one of them.
Yeah. Unless you go to New Orleans, then you start kind of believing, you're like, oh shit, this is some fucked up shit right now.
That's true.
mean,
I've only
you've
ever
never
been to very suburban places.
Yeah. What follows in the rest of the 40s and 50s is more of the same voodoo tropes. So much so that the next two prominent movies are literally called Voodoo Man and Voodoo Island.
That sounds like a Saved by the Bell goes to Hawaii type thing.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned it because I always think of Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island. Did you ever watch that?
Yes.
So the true birth of zombies, as everyone knows it, comes with George A. Romero. He's arguably the father of zombies. Honestly, it's not even arguably. He is the father of zombies. In his movie Night of the Living Dead in 1968. Funny enough, Romero was inspired by I Am Legend, which was a book in 1957, turned Italian movie Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston. Yes, that's right. I Am Legend, the movie with Will Smith, is a remake of a 1957 Italian movie, which is a rendition of a book. And honestly, George A. Romero basically says like he kind of, in a sense, ripped off I Am Legend, the whole premise of it, and which is weird. But I mean, I know I Am Legend, I think, is vampires. Back me up on that.
That's what I was just thinking. Like, it could be vampires, it could be werewolves, it could be a lot of things.
Right. It's also crazy to me that the Italians were the only ones on this whole modern zombie horror kick.
I found that a lot in my research. A lot of this
Yes.
stuff stems from like Europe.
Yeah.
Americans have no originality back then.
No, they did not. And there are no holds barred when it came to the gore and absolute reimagining that the 30s, 40s, and 50s just couldn't get when it came to zombies. Romero introduced the idea of zombies just existing because of an unknown virus or a virus from space,
Right.
as well as the flesh-eating portion, cannibalistic monster qualities into the zombie mythos. So no more voodoo. The voodoo's over.
Yeah, I like that. I like the infection or whatever. I think they handled it, and even though Contagion isn't a zombie movie, I feel like that's how a zombie apocalypse would happen. Have you seen
Yeah.
Contagion?
Yeah, it's a good movie.
It's a good movie about how like a virus starts, and it's like that's kind of the origin story to
It has
Zombie movies that-
film elements.
yeah,
for sure.
definitely. It's like a prequel to zombie
To
movies.
his- yeah, all started from batshit.
Yeah,
You remember the end of the film?
yeah.
The bat poops in China, and the pig eats the poop, and they bring it to the fancy restaurant, and Gwyneth Paltrow eats it.
Yep.
But back to The Living Dead. This is also coincidentally the first time I could find that becoming a zombie was an effect of being bitten by one, which makes sense considering this is the first time they're actually trying to eat you. And not
Makes
only
sense.
did Romero remaster the zombie horror genre, but he in a sense created the idea of a zombie apocalypse, as well as the violent and gory deaths people succumb to by zombies. There's a scene in the movie I'm specifically thinking where zombies are just tearing apart a person, but it looks like a turkey. It's legitimately a turkey. And I remember I had a film class in high school, and my teacher always pointed out that the zombies were eating a legit turkey. That was like a known behind the scenes thing. I don't know how valid that is because I actually went out of my way to find out if that was true. Can't find it. I don't know if it's actually a turkey dinner that they were eating. In the 10-year span from Night of the Living Dead to Dawn of the Dead in 1978, almost every zombie horror film now featured actual undead, rotting corpses with plenty of gore and violence to accompany it. And again, most Italian films were already doing that, but slowly American-made zombie films were following suit. Romero went on to continue revolutionizing the zombie genre and creating the Living Dead trilogy, which we know as Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead. He also made Land of the Dead, which was not good, and Diary of the Dead, which is pretty good. Is a different like genre remix. It's it's got documentary type, found footage style film. I actually really like Diary of the Dead. I've seen it a couple times. So I'm a fan. I don't know if you've seen Diary of the Dead.
I haven't seen Diary of the Dead. I've seen the two of them. I've seen the two.
So it's cool because Diary of the Dead is kind of, in a sense, it kind of takes place as if Night of the Living Dead was in modern time, because it's a bunch of film students from University of Pittsburgh that go out in the middle of the woods, and then they just kind of get caught up in the whole zombie apocalypse thing. And it's
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of it. It's good. You should definitely check it out. I think you dig it.
Okay.
And this kind of leads us into the zombies we know today, which are the running kind, which were first to appear, and I did not know this, in 28 Days Later in 2002. That was the first time we had running zombies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez.
The concept of running zombies came to the writer Alex Garland, who's the writer of the film, and he pitched the idea to Danny Boyle and Andrew McDonald, which are the director and producer of the movie, after they had already adapted one of his novels previously. So he was just like, hey, I came up with this idea of running zombies. Maybe we should make this movie. And
It's
now
funny
running
that it all
zombies
stemmed
are
off of that.
yeah.
It's like, hey, I have an idea for a zombie that runs. All right, yeah, we can make a movie off that.
And boom, 28 Days Later, which I think is awesome. I think it's so good.
I've actually never seen it.
What?
I haven't seen the sequel either, which makes sense.
Yeah, that is. Oh my God. You.
So we talked about, at the beginning of the episode, we talked about the movie The House of the Devil, which was considered the very first horror movie ever made.
The French film, The House of the Le House de le Devil, I believe is the translation.
Yes. Technically, it's not a horror film. Like, if you had watched it today, you would be like, what the fuck is this? It's basically it's basically a comedy fantasy with the devil. A guy encounters the devil, and that's automatically what makes it a horror movie, apparently, back then.
Is that what that they said it was a comedy?
Yeah, it said that it was like a slapstick, like, comedy fantasy.
Oh, I didn't know if it was. I thought it was meant to be scary.
No, it wasn't meant to be. Well, it wasn't meant to be like a standalone horror movie, but it kind of turned out that way. People were like really freaked out by it.
I see. Because I do believe that it was a comedy. Because I laughed, but I didn't know if it was like one of those like ironic laughs where like, oh, actually, we were trying to be serious. You're not supposed to be laughing at
No,
this
I
right
think
now.
it was legit supposed to be a comedy, but people were actually frightened by it. and that's why it's considered the first horror movie.
Oh, I did not know that.
So yeah, it was intended to make audiences laugh, but they actually like left the theater in terror.
That's insane.
So the reason that it is actually also considered a vampire movie, which John kind of touched on at the beginning, was at the end he turns into a bat, and back then that constitutes like instant vampire. Guy's a bat.
Yeah, he danced with the devil in the pale moonlight and became a vampire.
Became a bat. Yeah.
He literally dances with the devil too. That's not even like a reference to Batman 1989.
Actually, a little fun fact. So, like you mentioned, the movie is 3 minutes long, but actually back then, how they measured the runtime for a movie was in distance. So they would say it's 60 meters long, which is 3 minutes. So it's like
60 meters.
How long is this movie? I only have like 80 meters worth of time left. And they're like, good, it's 60 meters, so you're good.
I mean, that makes sense. You know, I wish they did that now. Honestly,
With
let's
like
get away
hard
with
drive
hour and
space.
minute.
They did like hard drive space. This movie is 267 gigs. And you're like, oh my God, I only have time for like 249.
That would be fantastic.
So vampire films were a staple in the early silent film era, and they were so popular. Like they had so many vampire films.
Is the reason that vampire films were so popular was because of Bram Stoker's Dracula story?
Yes, it was, because Bram Stoker's Dracula came out in like 1896.
Yes. Well, late. I don't know if that's the exact date, but it's definitely from the late 1800s. I feel like, can we just side tangent real quick? I feel like almost all scary shit that we know just comes from the late 1800s. That's probably why every time I think of them, I'm like, that's just like a picture of someone walking down the street in like 1880.
I know, and you're a little
scary as fuck.
You're a little
right
freaked
now.
out by it. Oh my God. I was looking at a house, and it was from 1799. And I was like, oh my God, that's a fucking scary house. But it was just a white regular house. Like it was nothing. And I was like, oh my God, I wonder, it's haunted. It wasn't until Bram Stoker's Dracula that people started like crazy mimicking that story for the most part. And up until that point, there hadn't been like a legitimate like feature length film with a vampire as the lead. So
Right.
the very first vampire movie was Nosferatu, the German movie in 1922, which is hilarious because Nosferatu is like a knockoff of Bram Stoker's Dracula. And
yeah, I think it's like basically a plagiarized version of it.
it is, yes. So the estate sued the filmmakers because it was so identical.
Bram Stoker's estate?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And they won, and the court ordered to have all of the copies of Nosferatu destroyed.
I thought there's copies still in existence, though.
There are. So in 1994, they had 4 copies. There's 4 copies in existence for the entire movie.
Wow.
And in 1994, they remastered the movie and like put it back together from parts of these 4 horrible quality
Holy shit.
prints.
That's
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy that because I always remember that movie from like just in talking or people talking about it. It's like that was always a very popular movie.
They did come up with a movie about like the making of that movie, a fictionalized version of the making of that movie. Willem Dafoe was in it. I
Really?
think Willem Dafoe was the Nosferatu character. I think it was kind of like a meta movie where they were like interviewing, except that Max Schreck actor was actually like a legitimate vampire. And he just fucking looked like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the movie I'm thinking about is Shadow of the Vampire. It came out in 2000. It had John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe, and Willem Dafoe was Max Schreck. And everyone thought he was just basically being like method as fuck. And well, he was basically just being what he was, which was a vampire, which is interesting the way that they kind of fictionalized it. It's not very good, but
It's actually kind of interesting because I always thought like growing up, that vampires had been a part of culture for hundreds and hundreds of years. That's actually not the case. Like, vampires didn't even really come about until the mid 1800s. So it was a fairly new concept when they started actually making vampire movies. There were a few mentions of the word vampire, and it was spelled a little different. It was Y-R-E.
Y-R, yeah. Oh, Y-R-E, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and there are some mentions, but it doesn't say, like, specifically what we know today, like bloodsucker, big teeth, turns into a bat. It's kind of like a word to describe certain types of people.
Okay.
Rather than, like, a specific...
A monster.
Yeah, a specific thing.
Okay.
It's kind of funny because, like, after doing all this research, like, I was looking through a lot of stuff. A lot of movies depict either Dracula or it's either Dracula or it's like a side character. There's never like a lead movie with another vampire rather than Dracula. And it's kind of funny doing research. It says that Dracula has been depicted 170 times in movies.
Wow.
It's the most of any fictional character ever.
Holy shit.
And that kind of blew my... Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
That definitely blows my dick up.
Even though they haven't made a Dracula movie since, I guess Dracula Untold, it's still like the most used character in movie history.
Yeah. That's not, but that, as far as like, he's the only main vampire character. That's not necessarily true. What about the Anne Rice novels like Vampire Lestat or like Interview with the Vampire or shit like that?
Yeah, that is...
Because that doesn't mention Dracula.
No, I'm talking specifically about the like the golden years of vampire stuff, which is like the late 1800s to like the early, like the teens, like 1913, and then you have like a little bit thrown in there with Nosferatu in 1922.
But you're saying like those only feature like Count Dracula.
Yeah, it's either like Dracula or it's like some they don't ever try to make like their own character and like build off of that. It's always like it's a vampire or it's Dracula, and it's always like built up as Dracula.
I see.
Even in the marketing material, it was kind of marketed as like a Dracula or Dracula knockoff without like saying it. It was like, you know the stories of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Well, this is like our vampire story. It's like, oh,
this is Count like
yeah,
Olaf, the Dracula man or something.
Yeah, exactly. So later on in the 70s, 80s, vampire movies are mainly used as like comedy specific movies.
In the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, mostly the 80s, because it was like, again, I go in and tapping into another subgenre. It's like the comedy horror genre. So it was like funny movies. They didn't have a ton of serious movies.
There was Fright Night?
Yeah, no, I'm not
saying 80s.
Yeah, I'm not saying there wasn't like legit horror vampire movies, but there was definitely more mainstream comedy vampire movies.
Okay. By the way, you also completely skipped over 1930s Dracula. Bela Lugosi, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like the quintessential Dracula story. Didn't they basically like word for word just redo Bram Stoker's Dracula? That's what the 1930s Dracula is?
Yeah.
And then there's the Francis Ford Coppola one with Keanu Reeves.
Fuck, Winona Ryder.
But
yeah.
Gary Oldman was so good in that movie.
It's a bad movie. It's
good
a
at
bad
it.
movie.
Gary Oldman's good at it.
Yeah, I would say the comedy vampire movies don't really start until the 90s, and then they hit it real fucking hard in the 90s. The early 90s.
Like what specifically?
Specifically like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that movie before the show actually came out.
That was a comedy?
It was like a dark comedy, like a dark vampire comedy.
Okay.
There's a couple more. Vampire in Brooklyn with Eddie Murphy.
Blackula.
With Eddie Murphy.
Oh, I thought that was Blackula. Oh, no, you're right. Vampire in Brooklyn, yeah.
So now, like, moving on to modern day, again, Twilight has pretty much ruined the vampire genre. They killed two really good horror genres.
I don't know, man. I think, and just to get back on the Anne Rice stuff, like, Interview with the Vampire is a good movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
It is a good movie. I saw it in theaters when I was like fucking 7 years old or something.
I mean, I guess it's not really horror, right? It's more
it's like a drama,
sexy drama.
Yeah, romantic. I don't know, romantic. It's a drama. I would say it's a drama.
Yeah.
Definitely not a horror movie.
No.
Although I did recently watch Deadpool 2, and that's the Indian guy, the taxi driver, talking about how he wants to be Kristen Dunst, like drinking the blood. That got me. That definitely got me. Which I saw Dracula Untold. I thought it was a
Dracula
decent.
Untold?
It's a movie that came out like 2014 or 15 with it's with the guy from The Hobbit, like the man, like the man.
Oh yeah, this doesn't even look good.
It wasn't terrible. It was actually a decent story. And
Luke Evans.
Yeah, that's him.
What about The Strain though? The Strain is a horror thing, and those are vampires. Even though they look like zombies, they are vampires. Strigoi.
Well, that's like saying they're vampires in I Am Legend, because they
are.
It could go either way.
I suppose, but they say they are vampires. It's not like in The Strain they're saying they're. And I also like the idea of the way they portray vampires in The Strain, because they're not sexy. They're like fucking disgusting, monstrous creatures that suck your blood like by a whole fucking dick coming out of their throat and then, attaching it. Like they're parasitic.
Yeah. I do like that depiction of vampires, because it's always like, even dating back to like the first iterations of vampire movies, it's like they're always like baby skin,
sexy, and
they got the cape on. It's never like a zombie type movie with vampires in it. It's never like a dirty, gritty movie.
Right.
It's always like a sexy Hollywood.
Yeah, because if you think about it, it's a rotting corpse, and they made a deal with the devil, right? That's like the whole thing. They make a deal with the devil. They're vampires. They shouldn't look nice. They need to look like dark and corrupted and gross.
Yeah, I think so. They need to look like they're dead and they want to kill you.
Right.
And they never make them look like that. Like, even in Blade. Like, Blade is...
Yeah, he's normal looking.
Yeah.
Aside from the eyes.
Normal guy, yeah. And everyone in there is, like, partying and hanging out at the club. Like,
and fucking. A lot of fucking.
A lot of fucking in that movie.
Same with Underworld,
Yeah, Underworld's the same. I think probably the best vampire movie that I've seen recently is What We Do in the Shadows. Have you seen that movie? That's
the Taika Waititi movie, right?
Yeah, he's like the main character in it.
I haven't. Worth watching.
I think it's on my Plex. You should watch it. It's a documentary style of 3 vampires living in
New Zealand,
and they're losers, and they're trying to fit into like the vampire community, and they're just like it's like the coming of age tale for vampires, pretty much.
That's funny. See, I always think of vampire movies as somewhat action, but also there can be horror elements. Now that we're talking about this, I'm thinking, yeah, I think that horror element's almost gone in a sense.
Yeah, it's definitely dead. There's a lot more romantic comedy, or not romantic comedy, but like romanticized version
Drama.
of the whole subgenre in general. Because there's like True Blood, which isn't really horror. There's obviously Twilight. There's a lot of shit that's even Dracula Untold wasn't like a true vampire movie. It was like a romantic drama, and the guy also happens to be Dracula.
So, what do you think? In what direction you think? Do you think we'll probably get back to?
I don't think we're gonna get a horror vampire movie in a long time. Like at least a mainstream one. We might get a Netflix one here or there, but we're not gonna get a mainstream one.
Yeah,
I think it's evolved too much to where now, like in the 1890s to like 1920s, like vampires were something scary. Now it's like vampires are associated with romance or like drama. Like nobody's like, oh my god, a vampire, that's scary. It's like, oh my god, I want to fuck it.
True. Well, Kevin, I'll say it now. This is my absolute favorite subgenre, just because it's campy, fun, and sometimes it can actually be really good. And that's slasher films. People argue that Halloween is technically the first true slasher movie, and I'm going to say they are wrong. Even some people would argue that Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Psycho are the first, and I'm going to say they're half right. Now, Psycho and another film, Peeping Tom, laid the groundwork for what eventually evolves into the modern slasher flick. Psycho has the main ingredients to create a slasher film. You've got your deranged killer with some sort of parental issues /
mommy issues,
history. Yeah, exactly. And it also features another main theme within horror films, which is sex. Sex is probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest theme, aside from killing, within a horror film. We see it with Norman Bates when he's watching women get undressed, and obviously the shower kill, very sexualized, something that was never seen in 1960.
Yeah. Little fun fact, that movie's actually filmed in Phoenix, Arizona. The building is still downtown standing. Yep.
Oh, I did not know that. I know that they come from Phoenix. That's like the plot.
Yeah, it's a white building with a large tower on top, like a 8 or 10 story building with a large like antenna tower on top. You've probably seen it. It's in downtown Phoenix.
Do people go by and be like, "Oh, let me go visit the Psycho"?
I think it may be abandoned right now. I'm not sure.
Don't sleep on that. Halloween, guys. We also get the beginning stages of The Final Girl, that are represented by our main character, Lila, who does most of the investigating as to where her sister disappeared to. And in a sense, we also get somewhat of a mask for the killer, and air quotes mask, because we have the dress and wig that Norman Bates dons as the identity of his mother, who's doing all the killings, rather than Norman himself, which kind of, if you think about it, every killer except maybe Candyman has a secret, not secret identity, but they're shrouded or covered somehow. Now, as for the second film I mentioned, Peeping Tom, another film to come out the same year in 1960, except this time in Britain, gives the killer a sense of theatrics, even more so than Psycho's Norman Bates dressing as his mother. In Peeping Tom, the main character / killer takes his victims, all women, and impales them with a blade that's attached to a camera, so he can get each shot of them dying. Which I thought this concept is fucking sick as hell, and feels like something that would be around today. But clearly people back then were not feeling it. They actually hated it. And the director of this movie's career was completely ruined because they thought it was vulgar and misogynistic, which is ironic considering it's 1960 and they're calling him a misogynist, which I didn't think that actually was a thing back then.
You must have been really fucked up to be called a misogynist back then.
Seriously, 100%. I do, however, want to give a quick shout out to Vincent Price's House of Wax in 1953 that had a slasher-like villain with a great gimmick. Obviously, he kills people. He encases them in wax. It was remade with Paris Hilton, I'm sure, as most people are aware.
I've seen that in theaters.
You sound so sad saying that.
Spoiler, she dies. That's the best part of the movie.
Wasn't that in the beginning?
No, it's towards the end. She gets covered in wax.
In hot wax?
Yeah.
Now, the 80s made the slasher film thrive, but the 70s had huge influencers aside from Halloween. 1971's Italian film Bay of Blood, directed by Mario Bava, clearly influences the more commonly known Friday the 13th. Let me just go over the plot real quick. Film takes place in a lake setting with a mysterious killer who uses an unordinary weapon, in this case it's a billhook instead of a machete, to murder a bunch of teens. Oh, he also uses a spear, which we all know.
Oh, yeah.
I think we all found out that Jason Friday the 13th uses quite often is a spear.
Yeah.
And the killer in Bay of Blood is also the son of a murdered countess who owns the property and is exacting revenge. Obviously, Pamela Voorhees is not a countess, but she is the proprietor of Camp Crystal Lake, and she dies. So Jason's exacting revenge, which is exactly what the killer in this Italian movie is doing. which is, again, another perfect 1971. I think Friday the 13th came out in 1980. So they basically just ripped off this movie 9 years later.
Damn. That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's crazy how much original stuff that you think is original is just like bullshit remakes.
Yeah.
Specifically
No,
from like the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Seriously. And I really gotta, I want to sidetrack a little to Mario Bava and his genius. If John Carpenter and Wes Craven can be considered fathers of slasher films, Mario Bava is their unnoticed grandfather. He really seemed to have influenced many American filmmakers with the way he did horror and portrayed violence in film. And he's also single-handedly responsible for creating the giallo genre in Italian film, which is murder mystery turned slasher films. I mean, he started all the themes of disguised killers, stupid and overly sexualized victims. Even his film in 1965, Planet of the Vampires, has been suggested that Ridley Scott used his inspiration for Alien and Prometheus, as many of the themes and design were quite similar. And specifically, not to side tangent, but it's how the crew finds the planet, the giant skeletons, like how they find an alien, and the way the aliens manifest themselves within a human host.
Oh man, that's a bummer.
So yeah, this guy, I feel like we need to be celebrating Mario Bava more because he basically came up with all these original ideas that have been ripped off by American and British filmmakers. Unless he ripped it off from some fucking Italian guy on the street corner. It's just like, I got an idea for an alien in a movie.
If you don't have an idea for something, you're like, just copy some foreign fuck that's like from the 50 years ago. Nobody knows about his stuff, obviously.
Right.
And just throw it out in America. It's like that's the recipe for a movie nowadays. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's sad because it's, first of all, not even Mario Bava. Throughout this entire episode, Italy seemed to have been on the right track as far as pioneering with horror movies and even clearly science fiction horror.
Yeah.
So for them to not even really be given any credit is honestly sad because so many people that don't listen to Wicked Hot don't know that Mario Bava basically has influenced a good chunk of content that we now know and love and is super commercialized and popular in America.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of, again, last week with the whole Batman Man-Bat thing. It's like, yeah, you gave me the idea for it, but it's my idea. Well, no, you didn't really, because it's this guy's idea. And
Right.
you're just kind of recycling it and releasing it in America.
Yeah. Well, I digress, but the 70s also featured Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Black Christmas, which was a Canadian movie in 1974. And at this point, we get more of the gimmicky monster / killer who kills teenagers and the whole implementation of a final girl. And for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it's Sally. Also, fun fact about Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film was shot in handheld in 16 millimeters. Wasn't even a 35.
Really?
Yeah.
Damn. Well, I would
Which
have had
gave-
to be handheld.
Right. Which gave it the whole like grainy look to it that kind of also inspired other movies like it. It's just very like grungy feeling, you know?
Yeah. It's like a guerrilla film. Like
Right.
run and gun type thing.
So 1978, Halloween, my personal favorite slasher film, was able to combine all these pieces and release it to the American audiences. I mean, we still killed dumb teenagers for the most part, but it wasn't too over the top and it relied more on suspense than gore. John Carpenter was the master of suspense, it's more of a thriller, right? Obviously, it was a huge success and spurred the creation of other franchises and a million of slasher formula films, thus cementing the trope into the subgenre. By 1984, the genre had become stale until Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street revitalized the genre by making the slasher a supernatural or fantasy being. And we kind of see that influence afterwards, because when you think about it, after 1984, Jason Voorhees kind of becomes a supernatural being. Then we have, Chucky from Child's Play. And just to jump towards modern stuff, like for the most part, the slasher film is kind of dead. Most modern movies are now all remakes or reboots or really shitty. Again, Netflix, straight to Netflix or straight to DVD, straight to VHS.
Yeah.
Slasher films.
What the great things that Netflix does, they're equally doing horrible things with. I'm serious. It's like, it's hard for a slasher movie to get any traction nowadays because like people are just pumping them out, throwing them on Netflix, and slasher movies and pretty much a lot of niche subgenre horror movies are not getting the due that they should be getting nowadays.
Right.
Because I've seen some good Netflix movies, horror movies that did not get wide releases.
Such as?
The Ritual comes to mind.
Yeah.
I know it did come out in England, but it never came out here. And it was great.
Yeah.
So my last one is a subgenre that I have never been a fan of, and it is gore porn, aka a splatter film, which I didn't know was. I've always called it gore porn, but apparently the term splatter film or splatter cinema came from George A. Romero when he was describing Dawn of the Dead.
Nice.
So you have Dawn of the Dead, which is basically a zombie movie, but they're also considering it a gore porn movie.
Probably because of Tom Savini, right?
Yes. So in the late 20th and early 21st century, graphic violence was basically labeled as torture porn or gore porn, and that's kind of how we know it today. But there is some contrast, like when the genre kind of first started, and George A. Romero, like you mentioned, was the godfather for zombie movies, is also the godfather for splatter films. And
interesting. Yeah,
so it dates back to the stuff that he was doing, and with like Evil Dead, a movie called Brain Dead, Dawn of the Dead. Those are all considered splatter movies, but they're also slapstick in a sense where they're over the top and like complete nonsense.
Definitely
especially Evil Dead.
Yeah.
But what really defines them is that they're not like any other horror film, which most horror films have like a linear path of like a story.
Right.
It's basically dealing with like unknown fears, like supernatural, dark, stupid shit.
Yeah.
Splatter films their only intent is to make you feel uneasy or like make you feel pain for what's happening on the screen. The emphasis on visual, and you get this with like Evil Dead, like movies that were made back then, is like they put most of the budget into the special effects and the visual effects, mainly special effects, of like how people are dying and like what they're doing. They don't put the money into like casting and like set design and stuff. It's like, they throw it all into how graphic can we make this movie,
right, and
still like make some money. So that was kind of the beginning steps of splatter film or gore porn, which was like early 70s, 80s. And a lot of these kind of intertwine with like slasher films like Jason, Friday the 13th, Freddy with Nightmare on Elm Street. Those are also considered splatter movies or gore porn. And it all kind of stemmed from, again, the Europeans, the French.
Oh God!
They in 1916 they had this. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the French name. It's translates to Theater of the Great Puppet, which was a.
That sounds scary as fuck.
It does, yes, yes. 1916. It was a stage performance that had blood, carnage. Actually, this was in 1908. And it made an appearance in England, and they couldn't handle the gore, so they like dumbed it down to be like a gothic kind of horror production. and took
Okay.
away a lot of the gore. So it's kind of funny because the British could not handle the gore that was going on in 1908.
That's funny.
So the first actual feature-length movie was in 1916, and it was D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, which...
Isn't D.W. Griffith the racist guy?
that definitely sounds like a racist name. 2 initials?
It is. It is the racist guy.
Okay.
It is the Birth of a Nation guy.
It is? Oh my god.
Yes.
I jokingly asked you that earlier.
And yours is actually true. So what was the movie? The bloody movie?
The movie was called Intolerance, and it featured a lot of the same nuances that they had in the Theater of the Great Puppet, the French play.
Okay.
And one of them was 2 on-screen decapitations. This is 1916. People are not used to seeing this type of shit.
Holy shit.
So it was 2 on-screen decapitations and a...
Wait, real or...
No.
Oh, okay. All right.
No.
I'm like, damn,
Again,
that's
it's a movie.
fucked up. Okay.
It's a movie, but people are not used to seeing this type of stuff. Like, they were blown away by a guy turning into a bat. Can you imagine what they were seeing, like, 10 years later?
I know, that was like a quick cut in the edit room.
Yeah, yeah. It also featured a scene of a spear driven into a soldier's body, like his torso.
Okay.
And people were so freaked out, they thought it was real at the time.
But that's not really a horror movie, right?
Well, it's like the very first, it's considered the first gore porn movie.
Okay. Okay.
And even like thinking about it now, it's like, that's not that bad. But back then, if you're watching that movie, you're like, oh my God, I just saw a train yesterday. Now I'm seeing a guy's head getting decapitated.
Yeah. Things really escalated there quickly.
Yes. It wasn't until like the mid 2000s that it got its like huge rise. Because it was always like a subgenre to another genre movie. Like you talked about slasher movies. Those are also considered splatter movies, but they never had like their own forum or their own movie. And it wasn't until Eli Roth's Hostel that there was a dedicated torture.
Wait, but did that precede Saw?
Well, it's kind of funny because Hostel is considered the first torture porn movie, which is kind of what gore porn or splatter porn has evolved into in its own genre.
Yeah.
And Hostel is considered the first movie, but it's funny because they retroactively named Saw the first movie because they couldn't figure out what genre to put Saw in. And
I guess it's also slasher in a sense, right?
it could be. I would say, if anything, it's like a psychological horror movie.
Okay.
You could definitely say it's a splatter movie or a
Slasher.
slasher. But it's kind of funny that Hostel gets the name of being like the first torture porn, and then like retroactively they're like, oh yeah, Saw was the first one.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure Hostel came afterwards, and I remember when the commercial came out, they're like, oh, okay. They're clearly copying Saw and following just the
Yeah.
torture and the ridiculous amount of like just blood and chaos.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy because like it isn't until 2004, 2005 that you get the gore porn splatter movies that we all know. Because it seems like they've been around forever, but honestly, they've only been around for 10, 12 years.
Yeah.
And again, with Netflix throwing out, especially these, I've noticed a lot of these gore porn movies on Netflix. And I did actually watch one last weekend, and it was fucking great. And I'm not a huge fan of these movies, but
What was it?
It's called The Terrifier.
Okay.
So it's about a clown, and when I say a clown, it's not like It or Bozo. Like, it's a fucking terrifying clown. Look it up. It's a terrifying clown.
Actually, that clown looks fucking awesome.
Yeah, it does. The guy who plays the clown does a really good job. There is a shit ton of gore in this movie, and when I say a shit ton of gore, I will explain one scene to you where a woman is being chained up, like arms out to the side, legs out to the side, but she's upside down.
Okay.
And he saws her in half from the
Oh my lord.
from the ass to her head. And it's like so graphic looking. I'm like, oh my God, how did they do this? Because I'm always thinking, like, how did they do something? Like, what techniques did they use? And it looks so fucking good. It looks disgusting, too.
Wow. I don't know if I would want to watch it, though.
It doesn't show her actually getting sawed, but it shows her after the sawing is commenced.
Okay. Okay, so with our last segment here, we're going to go over one of a movie that kind of fits into the genre, or doesn't fit into the genre for one we picked. So for me, I picked zombie film. And for this, you're going to be very surprised. I picked Dawn of the Dead, and I'm not talking about the George A. Romero Dawn of the Dead. I'm instead picking a fucking Zack Snyder movie.
Oh my God.
And I'm saying that this fits the zombie genre. And honestly, I'm a fan of this movie. And you want to know why I'm a fan of this movie? And it makes fucking sense why I like a Zack Snyder movie. Because James Gunn wrote the fucking script to this movie.
Of course.
James Gunn and George A. Romero. But I mean, everything, all the components of a zombie movie are here. We obviously have the new age running zombie, the beginning scene where I love the beginning scene of how she's kind of a nurse. She goes home. She, her and her husband do the dizzle. And then she wakes up and there's just that fucking zombie girl in like the living room or like in the doorway.
Yeah.
And then that other zombie like bites the fuck out of that guy and then he turns into a zombie. That beginning scene is so tense. And then we get the whole montage of the world ending and her just the whole post-apocalypse thing is just so nice and so awesome. And then all the survivors and all their different personalities coming together, surviving in the mall. I'm a big fan of the movie. And it just fits the genre so nice. It hits all those zombie points, and also like the characters are good. They're memorable. They have their own like personalities, and because I mean, you got the nurse, you got Ving Rhames as the cop, you got like the nice white guy, you have like the fucking Midwestern as fuck family.
Yeah,
you have to have the black guy in there.
Definitely
you
gotta
like
have the black guy.
The demented security guards that clearly want to be like cops and bad people, and then the one guy who's kind of not into the whole being assholes kind of thing. And then of course you have the person that saves the loved one from being discovered that they've actually been bit. So it has all those beautiful components of it. And honestly, like I think it's a good nod to the original Dawn of the Dead, and kind of it does its own thing with the new age zombies.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I don't like that movie.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Not a fan. Not a huge fan.
That's unfortunate. I like it. I think if I'm comparing it to like World War Z and stuff, I mean, World War Z is like good and other zombie movies are good, but I don't know. I think this one's just stupid and fun, but at the same time, like it has those components that I like out of a zombie movie. Diary of the Dead, though, I'm telling you, watch that.
Okay.
You'll like it.
Okay. So my pick is one that probably a lot of people have never seen before. And it's from my favorite genre, my favorite subgenre, the paranormal or demonic, supernatural. I'll just go with supernatural.
Okay. All right.
And it's a movie called Oculus.
Rift?
No. It's funny because like when I went to search for Oculus, all this Oculus Rift stuff came up.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So if you didn't know, it's actually a WWE produced movie, which I didn't know until the very end. I did not know until the end.
Karen Gillian's in it? Hell
yes,
yeah.
yes. So it's about. It's very hard to explain, but it's about basically an antique mirror that makes you can't destroy it. It makes you see things that or do things you wouldn't normally do when you're in like the vicinity of this thing, and you never know what's reality or what's not.
Okay.
So like at one point, she goes to the kitchen to get an apple or something, and she bites into it, and it turns out that it's a light bulb. Like she didn't know, and she can't tell if this is real or fake.
Oh,
if the mirror is causing this. So the mirror has like some demonic connotations to it, like it was somebody had possessed it or something, or it was like cursed.
Okay.
And it's basically haunting this family, and this brother and sister are trying to watch this mirror like around the clock, and they have like a video camera on it and all these contraptions to stop the mirror, like fail safes. There's like fail safes. So if something happens and they don't reset a timer, like a sledgehammer falls and it breaks the mirror. So there's like stuff they have in place to stop the mirror.
Okay. So in other words, so that way they're reminded that it's the real world and not the mirror dimension.
Yeah.
Like
so,
the Doctor Strange mirror dimension.
Yeah, so they've done or taken steps to ensure that they know. Kind of like the Inception top that Leo has.
Okay, cool.
They take steps to know what is real and what's fake. And the end of the movie, I'm not going to spoil it, but it ends so good.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
definitely not how you would expect.
Okay, cool. I'm into it. I'll have to check it out. All right, cool. Well, to close things up, which subgenre, 2 subgenres would you like to mix? 2 horror subgenres that you think these need to be made together?
Yep. And we're going to put some pre-selected ones on the Twitter because there's been a few that have already been combined. So we're going to take some random ones, throw them together, and see what everyone likes. I'm going to be honest. I want to see a slasher vampire movie. Like a vampire movie where the vampire is fucking ruthless.
Yes.
Because, like,
Yeah.
you know, we have, like, Jeepers Creepers and stuff, and that, I guess, could be considered a vampire slasher movie, but...
And Fright Night. Fright Night's kind of a slasher
Yeah.
vampire.
I
Well,
want,
it's like that's like it's like Disturbia.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I'd like to see, like, a Count Dracula just fucking murking people.
Yeah, that'd be fucking awesome. It's funny. I was actually gonna say a vampire gore porn where, like, if he kills somebody, it's just like Mel Brooks, Dracula Dead and Loving It, a fountain of blood just pouring out. Just like, oh my god, he just ate. What? Like that's what I want. That's the mix I need. So clearly, we both want like vampires to go back into the fold of scary and not, you know, drama,
the
or
romance.
whatever. Yeah. All right, cool, guys. Yeah, well, we'll have the post on our Twitter at Wicked Hot Talk that you can go ahead and vote. Let us know your thoughts on your favorite subgenres. And as always, thank you so much for sticking around. You can always find us everywhere podcasts are found. We'll see you in another 2 weeks. This is Wicked Hot Scary Month, special edition. So we'll be pumping out horror content for the month of October, as well as maybe a couple other little surprises. Thanks again for sticking around. We'll see you guys in the next episode of Wicked Hot.
Bye, everybody.